I was alone in the old countryside inn, finishing my rounds before bed. The last guest had gone to sleep, and the place was silent, too silent. As I walked down the long hallway, I heard it. Soft footsteps behind me. I froze. The inn was empty. My heart started hammering, and I told myself it was just my imagination until the footsteps began to match my own, step for step. I turned slowly, and there she was. A pale woman, standing at the far end of the hall. Her eyes were hollow, unblinking, and her lips moved, whispering something I couldn't hear. But the cold air carried a warning I could feel in my bones. Leave. Now. I stumbled backward, my breath freezing in my chest, and when I looked again, she was gone. The footsteps stopped, the silence returned, but I knew I wasn't alone. From that night on, every time I walked that hallway, I could feel her watching, waiting, and I never walked there without a shiver running down my spine. The night had a smell of iron and damp, as though the air itself remembered some long-forgotten violence. Rain tapped softly against the windows of the old rectory, a rhythmic whisper that masked something far darker. Inside, the house seemed to breathe. Every floorboard groaned under its own weight. Every shadow stretched like a living thing. Eleanor had arrived just as darkness claimed the sky, her flashlight cutting swaths through the heavy gloom. She had been warned. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones of strange voices and fleeting figures, but curiosity, or perhaps something stronger, drove her forward. The air smelled faintly of decay, a hint of earth and candle smoke, and she shivered. Her footsteps echoed through the hallways, each step answering itself in ghostly imitation. Then, she heard it a whisper, low, urgent, almost pleading. It was a sound that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end, yet impossible to place. Eleanor. The voice breathed, soft but deliberate, curling around her. Mind like smoke. She spun, flashlight swinging, but the beam found nothing. She moved deeper into the house, each room revealing layers of history, dust, and abandonment. Portraits of unknown faces stared from the walls, their painted eyes following her, accusatory and alive. The whispers grew louder, sometimes overlapping, a chaotic chorus that seemed to come from inside the walls themselves. She pressed a hand to the peeling wallpaper. It pulsed beneath her fingers, like the skin of a living creature. In the parlor, a chair rocked slowly, back and forth, as if someone invisible had just left. A floorboard creaked behind her, and she whirled, expecting to see a figure, but nothing. The air grew colder, breath visible in fragile clouds, and the whispering turned into soft, guttural moans. Eleanor realized she was no longer alone. The house was speaking. It had stories to tell, memories of grief and rage, etched into its very foundations. She could feel it, the fear of countless souls, bound to this place, refusing to be forgotten. A sudden bang of a shutter made her jump, and then silence and almost suffocating stillness that pressed on her chest. And then she saw it, a figure, pale and indistinct, hovering at the end of the hallway. Its eyes glimmered with a light that was not its own, a reflection of the torment it had endured. The whisper became clear, a single word that froze her blood. Remember. Eleanor's heart raced. Every instinct screamed at her to run, yet her legs were rooted to the floor. The rectory, with its endless shadows and its spectral voices, was not just haunted, it was alive, and it had chosen her to witness the memories it could not release. The night had only just begun. The morning light was weak, struggling to pierce the dense clouds that hung over the rectory. But Eleanor didn't notice. Sleep had abandoned her entirely, leaving her trapped in a haze of dread. Every shadow from the night before lingered in her mind, and the echo of that single word, remember, haunted her like a living thing. She tried to convince herself it had been imagination, a trick of the darkness. Yet, as she moved through the hallway, she saw them. Eyes, tiny, glimmering, and impossibly numerous, staring from cracks in the walls. They blinked in rhythm with her pulse, tracking her every movement. Eleanor pressed her palm against the cold plaster, half expecting it to recoil, but instead it seemed to lean toward her, curious and hungry. A soft scraping sound came from the floor above. She froze. The rectory had no visitors, no pets, nothing that could explain it. Each step she took toward the staircase felt heavier, as though the house itself resisted her presence. The whispers returned, softer this time, like distant voices just beyond the edge of hearing. They spoke in a language she could not understand, yet the meaning was clear. Stay. Compelled. She climbed the stairs. Dust motes danced in the weak light, and a cold draft wrapped around her ankles. At the end of the hallway, a door hung slightly ajar. She pushed it open. The room was empty, except for a small, crude portrait propped against the wall. It depicted a child, pale and sorrowful, eyes wide and too knowing. Eleanor's breath caught. Something about that face was wrong, as if the child had been painted alive. Then she noticed the walls. Hundreds of tiny scratches, forming patterns that pulsed in the corner of her vision. They weren't random. They were letters, names, dates. Eleanor bent closer, tracing the carvings with her fingers. Every touch sent a shiver down her spine, and a voice whispered directly into her mind, chilling and urgent. Do not forget us. The room grew colder still. Her flashlight flickered, and the shadows on the walls twisted into forms she couldn't comprehend. The child in the portrait seemed to shift, just slightly, turning its head as if to follow her. Eleanor staggered back, her heartbeat thundering. Panic surged, but even as fear demanded she flee, a deeper curiosity held her in place. She realized, with a sinking horror, that the rectory was a ledger of lost souls. Each mark, each whisper, each fleeting shadow was a story trapped in the walls, and the house, alive in some unnatural way, had chosen her to witness them all. A sudden knock echoed from the door behind her. Slow, deliberate. Not a human knock, too hollow, too resonant. Eleanor's hands trembled as she turned. The door was now wide open, revealing a darkness inside that seemed to pulse and breathe. From within came the faintest giggle, impossibly soft, and then a whisper that chilled her to her core. Come play with us. The rectory had begun its invitation, and Eleanor knew, in the marrow of her bones, that refusal was no longer an option. Eleanor stumbled back from the doorway, heart hammering, but the darkness inside seemed to call her forward, pulling at her very soul. Every instinct screamed to run, yet the air thrummed with a strange energy that rooted her in place. A soft scraping echoed from the walls like fingernails dragging across wood. Eleanor glanced around. The scratches she'd seen before now moved, reshaping themselves into symbols she didn't recognize, glowing faintly with a sickly yellow light. She reached out instinctively, and the moment her fingers touched the wall, the whispers grew louder. Voices layered over each other, pleading, crying, warning. You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't. The words wrapped around her like chains, twisting through her mind. She wanted to scream, but no sound came. The air grew colder, fog curling along the floor and licking at her ankles. Shadows stretched unnaturally, crawling along the walls, shifting shapes too quickly for her eyes to follow. Then, from the darkness of the doorway, she saw it, a small, pale hand. It hovered just inside, shaking slightly, beckoning. Eleanor's stomach churned, but she couldn't look away. The child from the portrait stood there, hair tangled, eyes black as coal. Its smile was crooked, unnatural, frozen in a way that made her skin crawl. Come, it whispered, its voice a mix of giggle and hiss. We've been waiting. Eleanor's pulse raced. She knew leaving might be impossible. The house itself seemed alive, breathing, guiding her deeper. Each step toward the door felt heavier, as though gravity had doubled. She could hear faint scratching behind her, something, or someone, moving in the shadows just out of sight. She wanted to turn and run, but curiosity and terror mingled, drawing her in. Her hand trembled as she reached for the doorknob. The instant her fingers brushed it, the shadows surged forward, cold fingers brushing her arms, whispering words she couldn't understand, but felt in her bones. And then the door slammed shut behind her. The world went black. When Eleanor's eyes adjusted, the room had changed. The floorboards were slick with something dark, and the walls were no longer walls, they were faces, hundreds of them, screaming silently. The child stepped closer, tilting its head. "Now you see us," it said. "Now you belong to us." A cold, invisible hand seized Eleanor's shoulder. Panic tore through her. She tried to pull away, but the grip tightened, freezing her in place. The whispers became a chorus, chanting her name over and over, overlapping until it was impossible to separate one voice from another. Eleanor realized, with a terror that made her stomach drop, that the house wasn't just haunted, it was hungry. And tonight, it had chosen her as its next meal. Eleanor's limbs refused to obey as the shadows held her in place, whispering her name in voices that seemed to crawl under her skin. Slowly, the child stepped closer, its black eyes boring into hers. "You can't leave," it said, voice eerily calm. "Not yet." The room seemed to breathe around her. Floorboards groaned, walls pulsed, and the faces etched into the plaster twisted with silent screams. The whispers intensified, forming words she could almost understand, telling stories of those who came before, names, dates, desperate pleas, warnings written in sound. A faint light flickered from the far corner of the room. Eleanor's gaze followed it, finding a trapdoor partially hidden beneath a threadbare rug. A chill ran down her spine. The child pointed to it, tilting its head. "Down there," it whispered, "is where the truth waits." Eleanor's heart pounded. Every instinct screamed to run, but something fear, curiosity, or both drove her forward. Her hand shook as she lifted the trapdoor. A foul stench rose, the smell of decay and old secrets. Darkness yawned below, swallowing the weak beam of light from the room above. She descended slowly, each creaking step echoing through the narrow staircase. At the bottom, a small chamber revealed itself. Walls lined with shelves holding tattered journals and brittle photographs. The air was heavy with dust and despair. Eleanor picked up one of the journals, and the words inside twisted her stomach with horror. Names of children, dates of disappearances, sketches of the child in the portrait, always watching, always waiting. Each entry more frantic than the last, a record of lives swallowed by the house's hunger. A cold gust extinguished the candle in her hand. Panic surged, but Eleanor forced herself to read on. The final entry was different. It wasn't a journal at all. It was a message, scratched into the wall with a fingernail, jagged and uneven. The house remembers. It chooses. It feeds. You are next. From the shadows, the child's voice floated down, low and menacing. "Welcome home." Eleanor's stomach dropped. She wasn't just exploring a haunted house. She had stepped into a living nightmare, and the house was hungry for her soul. The air in the chamber pressed against Eleanor like a living thing. Every inhalation tasted of rot and mildew, and her eyes darted across the shelves, but the books and journals seemed to shift subtly, as if the walls themselves were rearranging the room while she wasn't looking. A soft scratching sound came from behind her. Eleanor spun around, heart hammering, but the corner was empty. The whispers returned, insistent, circling her mind. "You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be here." The floor groaned beneath her feet. Floorboards warped into shapes that weren't quite natural, twisting into grotesque forms, their knots like staring eyes. The house was alive. It breathed, it watched, and it fed on fear. A sudden cold hand brushed against her shoulder. Eleanor spun violently, but there was no one there. Only a fleeting shadow that vanished as quickly as it appeared. Panic surged, and she stumbled backward right into a wall that wasn't solid. Her hand passed through it. The whispers sharpened into voices now, clear and urgent, telling her stories she hadn't heard before. Children trapped, families lost, secrets buried beneath layers of time and decay. The walls weren't just walls, they were memories. And they remembered her. Then she noticed them. Faint scratches crawling across the plaster like tiny, desperate fingers. Names, dates, messages of warning. But some were newer than others, fresh, still bleeding. Eleanor's heart clenched. The house wasn't only alive, it was hungry, and it knew her name. A low, melodic hum began, echoing through the twisted hallways above. Eleanor's blood ran cold. It wasn't music, not exactly. It was a summons. The child from the portrait appeared at the top of the stairs, its black eyes glinting. It beckoned with a crooked finger. "Come," it whispered, voice lilting like smoke. "The house wants to play." Every instinct screamed at Eleanor to flee, but the staircase before her stretched impossibly upward, twisting into a Hauntings spiral that defied logic. The walls pulsed, breathing in time with her racing heartbeat. Somewhere deep in the house, a laugh echoed soft, cruel, and ancient. Eleanor took a trembling step forward. The child's eyes followed her, unblinking, patient. The house had chosen, and there was no turning back. Eleanor's foot hovered over the first step of the impossibly twisting staircase. The walls throbbed with a subtle pulse, like a heartbeat matching her own. With each step upward, the air grew colder, heavier, filled with the scent of decay and old wood. The child's black eyes glimmered in the shadows above, never blinking, always watching. Its crooked finger continued to beckon, and Eleanor felt a compulsion she didn't understand, a pull stronger than fear. A whisper came from behind the walls. "Once you enter, you cannot leave. Not until you remember." Each step warped the stairs further, elongating them in unnatural ways, the banister writhing like a living serpent. Eleanor's hands gripped it tightly, yet it shifted beneath her touch, curling like smoke through her fingers. Panic rose, but the pull forward was irresistible. Halfway up, the whispering became voices, overlapping, urgent. They called names she didn't know, but felt intimately familiar, crying for help, warning her, laughing cruelly. The voices echoed from the stairs themselves, vibrating through her bones. Suddenly, the spiral staircase opened into a wide, dark hall lined with mirrors. Eleanor froze. Each mirror reflected her, but not quite. Some showed her twisted, elongated. Others showed her in her childhood home, in rooms she hadn't visited in decades. One mirror even showed her crawling across the floor, screaming, while something unseen dragged her away. The child appeared in every reflection simultaneously, multiplying with each glass surface. It whispered, soft and patient, "The house remembers everything, and it hungers for memory." A sudden, invisible shove sent Eleanor staggering into a mirror. The glass didn't shatter. Instead, it rippled like liquid and pulled her forward. She screamed, hands pressing against it, but the surface offered no resistance. In an instant, she was inside the mirror world, an echo of the house, dark and twisted, full of shifting corridors and doors that led nowhere. The walls whispered again, louder now, "Find the memory or become the story." Eleanor's reflection in the mirror twisted into something monstrous. It reached toward her with elongated fingers, trying to replace her, to trap her forever. She stumbled backward, heart pounding, realizing the house wasn't just alive. It consumed identity, memory, the very essence of those who entered. Above her, the child laughed. It was the pure, echoing sound of something ancient and unbroken, reverberating through the house like a bell tolling doom. Eleanor's only thought, "I have to survive." But how do you survive a house that remembers everything? Eleanor stumbled through the mirror world, her hands brushing against walls that pulsed like wet skin. Every surface reflected not her image, but fragments of the past. She saw fleeting visions of previous intruders. A man screaming silently as shadowy tendrils dragged him beneath the floor. A woman crying as invisible hands tore her hair. A child vanished behind a door that never opened. The air was thick, almost liquid, pressing against her chest. Every step echoed too loudly, the sound distorting and multiplying until it seemed like hundreds of footfalls were chasing her from all directions. A faint glow drew her toward a long corridor lined with mirrors, each fogged with condensation. As she approached, whispers swirled around her. "Remember, remember, remember." Each mirror held a different memory, not hers, but pieces of the house's victims. Their screams were frozen, etched in glass, reaching out for release. Eleanor hesitated before a mirror that seemed darker than the others. The reflection rippled, forming a door she could pass through. She knew instinctively that crossing this threshold could trap her forever, but something inside her urged her forward. Stepping through, she entered a vast chamber where echoes of the house's past intrusions coalesced into ghostly shapes. The shadows of people twisted and screamed silently, their mouths moving, their eyes pleading. One shadow lunged at her, only to dissipate into a cloud of black mist before reaching her. The child from earlier appeared, perched atop a floating staircase. Its grin was wider, more malicious. It pointed toward a door on the far side of the chamber. Eleanor understood the house was guiding her, or perhaps mocking her. A new whispering began, louder, urgent. Touch the memory, or be consumed. Against every instinct, Eleanor reached for a shadow etched into the floor. The moment her fingers grazed it, the figure solidified into a vision of her childhood bedroom, her old toys, her diary, even the bed she'd slept in as a child. But one detail was wrong. The diary pages were blackened, words shifting into warnings she didn't recognize. The child's laughter echoed again, closer this time. Eleanor realized with dread that the house wasn't just a trap. It was alive, feeding on memories, twisting them into terror, and she was now a part of it. Her next choice was clear. She could flee deeper into the house's labyrinth, chasing fragmented memories for survival, or risk becoming just another echo, forever trapped in the Hall of Echoes. Eleanor's heart pounded as she stepped deeper into the chamber. The floating staircase beneath the child dissolved into nothingness with every step, leaving her to cling to thin air. The shadows on the walls stirred like living ink, stretching, twisting, reaching toward her with grasping fingers that never truly touched. The whispers grew louder, more coherent. We were lost, now you will join us. They weren't just voices, they were promises of torment, feeding on fear, twisting reality until she couldn't tell where the house ended and she began. Suddenly, the floor beneath her cracked. A cold wind roared up from the darkness below, carrying with it the smell of decay and something far worse, anticipation. Eleanor scrambled, trying to find solid footing, but the house itself seemed to resist her, reshaping the chamber into a maze of impossible angles. A shadow detached from the wall. Tall, thin, with elongated limbs and a featureless face. It glided toward her silently, its presence warping the air. Every instinct screamed to run, but Eleanor froze, mesmerized by its unnatural grace. The shadow raised a hand, pointing at her chest, and her memories flickered violently. Childhood fears, lost friends, moments she had buried deep. You remember, it whispered without moving its lips. We remember. The child's laughter echoed from somewhere above. Eleanor looked up just in time to see the small figure vanish into a mirror suspended in midair. Panic clawed at her chest, but something inside her hardened. She had survived this far, she would not be consumed now. Using a shard of reflective glass from the floor, Eleanor swung at the shadow. The shard shattered on contact, and the creature recoiled, its form splintering into dozens of smaller shadows, all shrieking in unison. The chamber seemed to pulse with rage. A door appeared ahead, solid, tangible, almost normal in a way that felt unreal. But the whispers screamed now. Don't go, don't leave. Eleanor ignored them, sprinting toward the door. As she reached for the handle, a cold, invisible hand clamped her shoulder. She spun, but no one was there. Only the shadows lingered, stretching toward her from every reflective surface. With a deep, shuddering breath, she opened the door and stepped into a corridor that smelled of iron and old blood. The child's voice followed her, soft, teasing, impossible to locate. The real game begins. Eleanor's pulse thundered in her ears. She knew the house was no longer just a place. It was a predator, and she was its prey. Eleanor's legs trembled as she stepped into the corridor. The walls were lined with mirrors, each one warped, their surfaces rippling like water. But it wasn't her own reflection staring back. Each mirror showed a different version of her, distorted and broken. One screamed silently, eyes wide with terror. Another smiled cruelly, mouth stretching impossibly wide. Whispers drifted from every direction. Which one is real? Which one will stay? Eleanor's chest tightened. Her reflection in the nearest mirror blinked, then moved independently, stepping toward her, reaching out with hands made of shadow. She stumbled backward, heart racing. Realizing the floor beneath her wasn't solid, it quivered, like jelly. Mirrors multiplied, surrounding her from all sides. The air thickened with cold, metallic scent. She could hear the faint, frantic heartbeat of something large moving behind the glass walls, following her movements. A sudden flash of movement. The child appeared, perched atop one of the mirrors, grinning, holding a small, jagged knife. Eleanor froze. The child pointed at her, then laughed a sound like cracking porcelain. The mirrors around her warped violently, each reflection stepping out of its frame, crowding her, pressing against her sanity. Eleanor grabbed a shard of broken mirror from the floor and swung it, slicing through the nearest reflection. It screamed no sound, no substance, only anguish, and dissipated into a cloud of dark mist. But more shadows emerged, relentless, crawling from every reflective surface. She backed up, pressed against a mirror that shimmered differently than the others. The surface rippled, revealing a hidden door. Hope surged in her chest. With a desperate push, she forced the mirror aside and stepped through into darkness so thick it seemed alive. A whisper followed her through the doorway. "You cannot hide. We are everywhere." Eleanor's hands were slick with sweat, her breath ragged. The game was far from over, and she realized with a chill that the house didn't just want her fear, it wanted her surrender. Eleanor stumbled forward, the darkness swallowing her whole. Her eyes strained, but only the faint outline of a room appeared. Cribs lined the walls, each rocking slowly on its own. A cold draft carried the scent of decay and something faintly metallic, like blood. From one crib, a small hand emerged, fingers curling with unnatural strength. A high-pitched wail echoed across the room, bouncing off the walls and burrowing into Eleanor's mind. She realized the sound wasn't coming from the crib. It was coming from every crib, every doll, every shadow. The child from the mirrors appeared again, perched atop a mobile, giggling. "They're hungry," it whispered, voice dripping with malice. The cribs began to rock violently, a synchronized motion that turned the floor into a trembling sea of wooden slats. Eleanor tried to flee, but the nursery seemed to expand endlessly, doors vanishing, walls stretching upward, trapping her inside. A shadow crawled out of a crib, taking the shape of a tiny figure, but its eyes were hollow, black pits that sucked in the dim light. It whispered Eleanor's name in a voice she recognized, her own mother's voice, twisted and distorted. Eleanor screamed as the floor beneath her cracked, sending her sliding toward the center of the room. There, a massive crib appeared, far larger than the rest, its mattress soaked in darkness. From it, dozens of shadowy hands reached up, clawing toward her. She grabbed a broken mobile from the floor, swinging it like a weapon. The hands recoiled, shrieking in silent agony. Eleanor realized the shadows were feeding off fear itself. The more she panicked, the stronger they became. She clenched her teeth, forcing herself to breathe, forcing herself to calm. Slowly, deliberately, she walked toward the giant crib, eyes fixed on the shadows. With a defiant yell, she plunged the mobile into the darkness at its center. There was a flash of red light and a scream that wasn't human. The shadows scattered, retreating into corners. Silence fell, but Eleanor knew it was only temporary. The house was awake, and it was angry. A whisper lingered in the air as she backed away. "You may have survived, for now." Eleanor's hands trembled as she pressed against the cold, warped walls, trying to steady herself. Every corner seemed alive, pulsating faintly, as if the house had a heartbeat of its own. The whispers had returned soft, mocking, like children laughing behind closed doors. She noticed a faint glow seeping from under a door at the end of the hallway. With each step, the floorboards groaned under her weight, sending echoes that sounded like footsteps following her. She pushed open the door. Inside, the room was vast, impossibly large. far beyond the dimensions of the house she knew. The walls were lined with portraits of children, their eyes hollow and dripping shadows. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, atop which rested an ancient, cracked music box. Eleanor approached cautiously. The music box began to play on its own, a haunting lullaby that twisted the air around her. With each note, the children's portraits shifted, their expressions contorting into grotesque, pleading masks. Some reached out from the frames, ghostly hands scratching at the glass. A sudden coldness enveloped Eleanor as the child from the mirrors appeared again, floating above the pedestal. "This is the heart," it whispered, voice echoing like a chorus of the lost. "All fear feeds it. All sorrow grows it." The music box's tune intensified, and the portraits began to weep shadows that pooled on the floor, forming tendrils that reached toward Eleanor. She realized the house was alive through pain, consuming lost souls to sustain itself. Stealing herself, she grabbed the music box, intending to destroy it. As her fingers touched the cracked surface, the room quaked violently. The shadows screamed, the children's faces twisted into silent agony, and the house itself seemed to convulse in rage. Eleanor wrenched the music box from the pedestal, smashing it against the wall. The haunting melody stopped abruptly. Silence fell, thick and suffocating. The portraits froze, staring lifelessly, their mouths open in silent screams. But Eleanor knew this was only a pause. The house had a heart, yes, but hearts regenerate, and the shadows never forget. She backed toward the door, but a whisper lingered, chilling her to the bone. "You cannot leave. Not yet." Eleanor stumbled down the hallway, the echoes of the house's whispers following her like claws scraping the air. The shadows from the portraits had begun to slither along the floor, pooling into shapes that twisted and writhed as if alive. Suddenly, the child from the mirrors appeared before her again, but this time its form had changed. Its small, pale body was elongated, limbs bent at impossible angles, and its hollow eyes glowed with a malevolent fire. Behind it, the shadows coalesced into hundreds of screaming faces, all pleading, all warning. "You cannot escape," it hissed, voice sharp like broken glass. "Every step you take feeds me, strengthens me." Eleanor backed away, heart hammering, scanning the hallway for any exit. The walls stretched unnaturally, closing in around her, corridors twisting in impossible angles. She realized the house warped reality, feeding off fear to bend the world to its will. A sudden vision struck her, a memory of a child crying in a dark room, begging for help. The realization hit her. The Overlord had once been a child like the ones in the portraits, corrupted by sorrow and malice, trapped in the house and turned into its master. With trembling hands, Eleanor remembered the shards of a silver locket she had found earlier in the attic, a fragment that glowed faintly. She held it out, praying it would work. The Overlord recoiled, screeching as the light burned against its form. "You cannot harm me!" it shrieked, but Eleanor felt a spark of hope. The locket's glow began to spread, illuminating the twisted shadows, revealing their true forms, trapped souls, crying out for release. But the Overlord would not give up. It lunged at Eleanor, moving with impossible speed. She dodged, barely keeping the locket between them, feeling the warmth of its light against the crushing darkness. A voice echoed in her mind, soft but commanding. "Use it. Free them. Break its hold." Eleanor tightened her grip, stepping toward the Overlord, determined. The house trembled, groaning as though resisting the intrusion. But she pressed on, ready to face the heart of darkness itself. Eleanor's hands trembled as she gripped the silver locket, its faint glow a fragile shield against the suffocating darkness. The Overlord loomed before her, its limbs twisted like shattered marionette strings, hollow eyes burning with fury. Around them, the walls of the house pulsed, breathing, alive with the whispers of hundreds of trapped souls. "You think a trinket can stop me?" it hissed, voice a chorus of broken children, their pain twisted into malice. Eleanor remembered the stories of the house, how each child, lost within its walls, left a piece of themselves behind, feeding the Overlord's power. Each face she had seen in the portraits, every small figure in the mirrors, was part of its strength. Taking a shaky breath, she spoke aloud. "I will not let you control them anymore." Her voice wavered, but the locket responded, glowing brighter, feeding on her courage. The Overlord shrieked, a sound that bent the air, curling around her ears. Shadows lunged like tendrils, but the silver light cut through them, revealing tiny, frightened faces, children trapped in darkness, eyes wide with hope. One by one, they began to step forward, drawn toward Eleanor. The Overlord's form flickered with anger, its shape unstable. It lashed out, and the walls groaned, trying to crush her beneath their weight. A sudden vision flashed before her eyes, a memory of the Overlord as a living child, frightened and abandoned, its pain twisted into hatred by the house. Eleanor's resolve hardened. This creature was not invincible, it was a child lost in the shadows. With a scream, Eleanor plunged the locket into the air between her and the Overlord. A burst of silver light erupted, scattering the shadows, illuminating the faces of the trapped children. Their voices, soft at first, grew louder, chanting a melody of release. The Overlord screamed, disintegrating into a cloud of darkness and echoes. One by one, the children's spirits dissolved into light, finally free, leaving the house trembling and silent. Eleanor fell to her knees, exhausted, the locket dimming to a soft glow. The oppressive weight lifted, and for the first time, the house seemed empty still, broken and waiting. But deep in the shadows, something stirred. A faint whisper, almost playful. This is far from over. The house was silent, but Eleanor knew silence was never peace here. Every creak of the floorboards, every draft whispering through cracked windows felt like a watchful gaze. She wandered through the corridors, her footsteps echoing in the hollow spaces where the Overlord's shadows had once writhed. In the grand hall, the portraits now stared back at her with blank, mournful eyes, no longer twisted with malice. Yet something was off. An almost imperceptible hum seemed to rise from the walls themselves, a vibration that made her teeth chatter. Then she noticed the floorboards ahead, tiny scratches etched in intricate patterns, almost like a code. Kneeling, Eleanor traced the lines with her fingers, and a cold, sharp voice whispered through the air. "You freed them, but you awakened me." The words sent shivers down her spine. Eleanor spun around, but the hallway was empty. Shadows shifted just beyond her vision, curling like smoke, but she could see no form. The locket pulsed faintly, as if warning her that danger lingered, that the Overlord had been only a piece of the house's true terror. She moved carefully, heart hammering. Behind a broken door, she found a room she hadn't noticed before. Its walls were covered with more etchings, faces pressed into the plaster, their mouths open in silent screams. And at the center, a small black box, humming with a dark energy that seemed to pulse in time with her own heartbeat. As she reached for it, the shadows recoiled and then lunged, not to attack, but to warn. Eleanor realized the house itself had a mind, a will far older and far crueler than the Overlord had ever been. It was awake now, and it knew her name. Her fingers trembled on the box's lid. Something powerful, something ancient, waited inside. A whisper rose from the walls, soft but clear. "Open me, if you dare." Eleanor swallowed hard. The line between courage and madness blurred. The house had survived centuries of cruelty, feeding on fear, and now it had chosen her as its next player. The locket glimmered once, a warning, and she knew the fight was far from over. Eleanor's hand hovered over the black box, the air around her thick with tension. The walls seemed to lean closer, groaning as if the house itself held its breath. The locket on her chest pulsed like a heartbeat, warning her something inside this box was alive, or at least had been alive once. Summoning her courage, she lifted the lid. A chill gust swept through the room, extinguishing the faint candlelight and leaving her in darkness. A whisper echoed, soft and sibilant, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. "Do you want to see them?" Her stomach twisted. She peered inside and saw nothing at first, just darkness. But then the shadows inside the box began to move, forming shapes that resembled human figures, distorted and screaming silently. Their eyes glowed faintly, pleading for release, or maybe for revenge. Eleanor's breath caught as one shadow stepped forward, extending a hand toward her. The locket blazed with light, and the shadows recoiled. Eleanor realized the box was a prison, not a gift. The Overlord hadn't been the true power. This box held the remnants of every tormented soul trapped in the house for centuries. And now, with her touch, they were awake. The whispers grew frantic, overlapping in a cacophony of despair. Free us, or die with us. Eleanor's mind raced. Could she trust the box? Could she free these souls without unleashing something worse? Every instinct screamed to close the lid. But curiosity and the haunting pull of the locket kept her rooted. Suddenly, a cold hand gripped her shoulder. She spun around, heart hammering, but no one was there. The shadows in the box shivered, restless, as if sensing her fear. The locket flared again, sharper, brighter, urging her to act, but act how? The house itself seemed to pulse with anticipation. Eleanor knew that whatever decision she made next would shape her fate and the fate of the trapped souls forever. Her fingers trembled as she reached back toward the box. The whisper came again, this time more insistent. The choice is yours, but choose wisely. Eleanor's fingers hovered over the black box, trembling as the whispers pressed into her mind. The locket's glow throbbed against her chest, urging her forward, yet every instinct screamed to pull back. With a sharp inhale, she lifted the lid fully. The shadows inside surged, spilling over the edges like liquid smoke. Shapes. Contorted faces twisted in agony, hands clawing at the air as though they could reach her through the thin veil of reality. Eleanor stumbled back, but the box's pull was magnetic, impossible to resist. A scream echoed from the shadows, hollow yet deafening. The locket pulsed violently, and a spectral figure emerged, its body flickering between human and something else. It spoke in a voice that was both hers and not hers. You awakened us. Now you will see what freedom costs. The air grew icy, each breath a razor against her lungs. Eleanor felt unseen fingers brushing her skin, tugging at her hair, pressing against her bones. Panic clawed at her mind, but she forced herself to focus. She had to understand the box, or she would be consumed. A single thought pierced the chaos. The locket. It wasn't just a charm, it was a key, a tether. If she could channel its light, she might contain the shadows, perhaps even communicate with the trapped souls. She held it aloft, chanting the words she didn't know she knew. The shadows hesitated, swirling but not advancing, whispering in a chorus of fear and hope. The locket's light expanded, touching each shadow, revealing glimpses of their past lives, mothers, children, victims of cruel fates, all imprisoned within the box. Then the figure screamed, a sound that shook the walls and splintered the floorboards. "You cannot save them all!" it cried. Eleanor realized the truth. Freedom came at a price. Every soul released weakened the boundary between the living world and the darkness beyond. If she wasn't careful, the house itself could awaken, hungry for more than just shadows. With a trembling hand, Eleanor made her choice. She would free some, contain the rest, but the locket burned against her chest, a reminder that the house was watching, and it never forgave mistakes. Eleanor's hands shook as she channeled the locket's glow toward the writhing shadows. One figure, a young girl with hollow eyes, shimmered in the light. Slowly, she stepped forward, her translucent feet barely touching the floor. Eleanor's heart leapt. She had done it. She had freed one, but the victory was fleeting. The freed spirit let out a wail that reverberated through the house, shattering mirrors and rattling windows. The walls groaned as if the house itself were enraged, angry that its captives were slipping away. From the darkness, more shadows surged, clawing at Eleanor, their whispers now laced with malice. The locket pulsed wildly, burning her hand, demanding focus. Eleanor realized freeing a soul didn't just release it, it demanded energy, a piece of her own vitality in return. She staggered, gasping, but pushed forward. Another figure emerged, a man, his face twisted in pain and relief, reaching out to her as if to thank her before vanishing entirely. Then, the house reacted violently. Floorboards cracked, beams fell, and the air grew thick with a choking, cold fog. Eleanor felt the pull of something immense, something alive. The shadows weren't just trying to escape. They were consolidating, becoming something greater, hungrier. A whisper, sinister and close to her ear, hissed, "You think you can control us? We are the house, and the house will not be denied." Panic threatened to consume her, but she gritted her teeth. If she faltered, the released souls would be lost forever, devoured by the growing darkness. Summoning all her strength, Eleanor pressed the locket to her chest, the light flaring bright enough to blind the encroaching shadows. For a moment, silence reigned, and then a cold, menacing laughter echoed through the walls, low, mocking, and unmistakably alive. The first victory had been won, but the house had just made its first move in the true game of terror. Eleanor understood now. Freeing souls was only the beginning. Eleanor barely had a moment to catch her breath. The walls were no longer just walls. They twisted, stretching like the limbs of a living creature. Windows became black voids, reflecting only her terrified expression, while unseen fingers scraped along the wooden floorboards. From the shadows emerged grotesque shapes, distorted forms of those she had freed, now twisted in rage, their faces warped with hatred. They lunged, their hollow eyes boring into her, and Eleanor realized the house had claimed them, turning the souls she freed into extensions of its will. She clutched the locket, its warmth pulsing against her chest, reminding her of the fragile hope she still held. But with every step forward, the floor groaned, and the ceilings lowered as if to crush her. Doors slammed shut before she could reach them, trapping her in a corridor that seemed to stretch endlessly, bending physics itself. The whispers returned, urgent and taunting, echoing from every corner. "Run, little girl. You can't save them. You can't save yourself." Eleanor's pulse pounded in her ears. She realized the house wasn't merely haunted, it was sentient, aware of her every move, anticipating her actions, feeding off her fear. Each freed soul made it stronger, each step forward more dangerous. Summoning every ounce of courage, she raised the locket high. Its light flared, cutting through the darkness in jagged arcs, and for a fleeting moment, the shadows recoiled. But the house was relentless. A monstrous hand of wood and shadow burst from the wall, slamming into the floor inches from her feet, splintering boards in a violent spray. Eleanor's mind raced. If she could not outsmart the house, she would become just another twisted spirit, trapped to serve its malevolent will. She needed a plan, a way to turn the house's own power against itself before it consumed everything. And then she saw it, a faint glow deep within the heart of the house, a place where the shadows converged, where the locket might reach its true potential. But reaching it would require confronting the house itself. The corridor seemed to pulse with anticipation, alive and watching. Eleanor knew one thing with chilling certainty. The house would fight with every ounce of its twisted strength. Her next step would determine if she was the hunter or the hunted. Eleanor's feet moved almost of their own accord, guided by the faint, pulsating glow deep within the house. Every step echoed like a drumbeat of doom, the shadows curling and twisting around her, whispering promises of despair. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of damp wood and something fouler like decayed flesh. Walls groaned, stretching as if the house itself was breathing, mocking her, daring her to proceed. Doors slammed shut behind her, sealing off escape, while the floor beneath her warped, forcing her to jump across jagged gaps that seemed to open spontaneously. Figures emerged from the shadows, twisted forms of the souls she had freed. Their faces were hollow, eyes black voids that reflected nothing but her fear. They advanced in silence, yet Eleanor felt their intent, to drag her into the darkness and make her part of the house's twisted collection. Clutching the locket, she whispered, "I won't let you win." The locket's light flared, piercing the darkness in sharp beams. For a moment, the figures froze. recoiling from the brilliance. Eleanor realized this was her only weapon. The locket could repel the house's creations, but only briefly. She had to reach the heart before the light faded. Ahead, the walls opened into a massive chamber, a cathedral of shadows. The glow originated from a towering black spire in the center, pulsing like a heartbeat. Eleanor could feel the house's awareness here, a sentient force radiating malice, testing her resolve. The moment she stepped closer, the spire shivered, and the floor cracked. Black tendrils shot up, snaking toward her like living ropes, latching onto her ankles. She struggled, swinging the locket wildly, and the light cut the tendrils away, burning the shadows where they touched. Then a voice, deep, rumbling, impossible, echoed through the chamber. So, the little intruder seeks the heart, but all hearts break. Eleanor froze. The house was speaking. Not with whispers, but with intent. Its consciousness pulsed around her, seeking to crush her hope before she could strike. She took a deep breath, heart hammering, and stepped closer. Every pulse of the spire made the chamber vibrate. The shadows crawling up the walls, forming horrific shapes that shrieked and lunged. Clutching the locket, she realized the truth. She had to place the locket directly on the spire. Only then could the house's power be challenged. Only then could the trapped souls be freed. If she survived the attempt, the house was waiting, and Eleanor had no choice but to face it. Eleanor's hand trembled as she approached the black spire, its pulsing heartbeat echoing through her chest. The air was alive with malice. Every shadow seemed to reach out, clawing at her skin, whispering in voices that weren't there. The floor quaked beneath her, and for a fleeting second, she feared it might swallow her whole. The trapped souls from before now floated around the spire, their hollow eyes pleading. Some tried to warn her, but the house's dark energy twisted their forms, forcing them back into silence. Eleanor realized she had seconds, perhaps moments, before the shadows would overtake her entirely. She raised the locket. Its soft golden light flickered against the oppressive darkness, a fragile shield against the house's crushing power. The spire pulsed faster, almost as if aware of her intent, its surface shifting like liquid shadow. A wave of cold hit her, knocking the locket from her hand. She lunged, catching it just in time, but the shadows surged with renewed vigor, writhing like serpents, coiling around her legs. "Not now! I can't fail!" Eleanor shouted, her voice cracking, but determination burned in her eyes. She kicked the nearest tendril away, forcing herself to her knees, and lunged forward. The moment the locket touched the spire, a brilliant explosion of golden light ripped through the chamber. The shadows screamed, retreating like water before a storm. Eleanor's vision blurred, and she felt herself lifted by a force that was both violent and protective. The spire trembled violently, and then silence. Eleanor collapsed to the floor, coughing, gasping for breath. The spire was cracking, its black surface flaking away like charred bark. The trapped souls floated toward her, finally free, their forms dissolving into harmless glowing motes of light. The house groaned, an angry guttural sound that shook the walls. But for the first time, Eleanor felt a sense of hope. The heart of darkness had been wounded. A distant rumble hinted that the house's power was not gone. It was wounded, yes, but still alive. And Eleanor knew the fight was far from over. Eleanor stumbled through the crumbling hallways, the golden motes of freed souls swirling around her like a fragile storm. The house, though wounded, was far from defeated. Every step she took echoed unnaturally, and a low whispering filled the air, words she couldn't understand, yet felt deep in her bones. The walls seemed alive, pulsing with a sickly green light. Shadows slithered along the edges, stretching and twisting into grotesque shapes that watched her every move. Her breath came in ragged gasps. The locket hung heavy around her neck, its light flickering with each heartbeat. From the far end of the hall, a mirror shimmered unnaturally. Eleanor froze. In its reflection, she saw herself. But her eyes were hollow, dark voids staring back at her. The whispering intensified, now sounding like a chorus of voices chanting in unison, promising torment and despair. She stepped closer, compelled against her will. The mirror rippled like water, and suddenly a hand, pale, clawed, and skeletal, shot out, grasping at her. She yanked backward, stumbling, nearly dropping the locket. The light faltered, and the shadows surged forward, eager to claim her. Eleanor forced herself to focus. The whispers spoke of fear, but they had no power over courage. She raised the locket, its light flaring bright, burning back the encroaching shadows. The mirror cracked, splintering into shards that fell silently to the floor, each reflecting fleeting glimpses of the house's tortured past. A door at the end of the hall slowly creaked open, revealing a staircase spiraling downward into darkness. Eleanor knew instinctively that this was where the heart of the house had retreated. The final confrontation awaited below. As she descended, the whispers followed, now a harsh scream, echoing off the stone walls. "You cannot escape. You cannot survive." Eleanor tightened her grip on the locket. She would survive. She had to. The staircase seemed endless, coiling into a void of darkness that swallowed all light. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the locket, its glow faint but unwavering. The whispers had turned into voices, screaming in anguish, calling her name, mocking her courage, warning her to turn back. She ignored them. At last, she reached a massive, iron-bound door, warped and blackened as if burned by some unholy fire. Carved into its surface were countless twisted faces, each frozen in silent screams. The air was thick, oppressive, and smelled of decay. Eleanor hesitated, then pressed forward. Inside, the room was vast, a cathedral of horror. Shadows writhed along the walls like living snakes. In the center floated a figure indistinct at first, then clearer, the entity that had haunted the house for generations. Its eyes glowed red, and a grin split its formless face, stretching impossibly wide. "You've come far," it hissed, voice like 1,000 whispers in unison. "But this is the end." Eleanor's heartbeat pounded. She could feel the locket reacting, its light intensifying, fighting back the darkness. Every story she had heard, every ghostly tale, had led to this moment. She raised the locket, and a beam of pure light cut through the shadows, burning across the floor. The entity recoiled, screaming a sound that rattled the walls. Shapes burst from the darkness, hands, faces, claws, but the light held, illuminating the nightmare in sharp detail. Eleanor moved forward, each step steady, her resolve hardening. The locket pulsed with a final, blinding surge. The entity writhed, collapsing into a storm of shadow and ash. The hall shook, walls cracking, debris falling, but Eleanor pressed on. She could feel the house's heart unraveling, its hold weakening. Then silence. The shadows dissipated, leaving the room eerily still. Dust floated in the golden light of the locket, and Eleanor realized she had survived the heart of the house. But somewhere deep beneath, a whisper lingered, faint yet chilling. "This is not the end. Not yet." Eleanor stepped cautiously through the remnants of the shattered hall, her boots crunching over broken wood and glass. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of soot and something far fouler like decay that had been buried for decades. For a moment, she felt relief, thinking the worst was over. Then she heard it, a whisper, soft and serpentine, curling around her ears. "You cannot leave." Her pulse quickened. The locket pulsed faintly, a warning that the darkness wasn't gone. It had only changed shape. From the walls, cracks twisted and writhed, small tendrils of shadow slithering outward like reaching fingers. Eleanor's heart hammered in her chest. She pressed on, following the whispers down a narrow corridor that hadn't existed before. The walls were alive, with movement faces emerging briefly, mouths opening in silent screams, eyes flickering with desperate warnings. She stumbled, nearly falling. But the locket's light steadied her. At the end of the corridor, a trapdoor gaped open, blackness yawning beneath. From its depths came a new wave of whispers, overlapping voices of anger, sorrow, and rage. Eleanor knew instinctively. Whatever remained in the house had retreated here, waiting, biding its time, gathering every ounce of courage. she descended into the darkness. Each step sent shadows spiraling around her like smoke in a storm. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they became a cacophony of voices crying, mocking, and pleading. At the bottom, she found a chamber unlike any other, a pit of living shadow, writhing and pulsating. In the center, something coalesced, a form both human and not, its shape shifting, merging with darkness, the locket's light casting horrifying reflections on its ever-changing body. It stopped moving and looked at her, or at least she felt its gaze pierce her soul. "You freed some, but the rest remains," it hissed. Its voice was a dozen in one, low and grating, echoing through the chamber. "And soon they will rise." This was no longer just a haunted house, this was a prison, a breeding ground for nightmares, and somehow she had to survive it. The shadows stirred, the whispers screamed, and Eleanor realized that the real terror had only just begun. Eleanor's breath caught as the shadows around her thickened, slithering across the chamber floor like living smoke. The locket's light pulsed urgently, each beat echoing in her chest like a warning drum. The darkness was no longer passive, it was moving, searching, hungry. From the blackness emerged shapes humanoid but wrong. Limbs twisted at impossible angles, faces blurred and shifting, eyes gleaming with malevolence. They circled her, whispering her name, calling her forward, laughing without sound. Eleanor stumbled back, heart hammering. The locket's glow flared, casting a protective ring of light, but the shadows recoiled only briefly before flowing around it. As if liquid and alive, she realized she couldn't fight them. They didn't attack in the normal way. They sought fear, weakness, the tiniest crack in her resolve. Her mind raced. If she faltered, if she let panic seep in, they would consume her entirely. A voice cut through the chaos, a child's voice, soft and trembling. "Eleanor, follow me." Turning, she saw a small figure emerging from the darkest corner. The boy's eyes were wide with terror, his clothes tattered. He beckoned her silently, moving swiftly through gaps in the shadows. Trusting him felt impossible, but staying put meant certain doom. With a deep breath, Eleanor followed. The shadows surged after her, reaching with tendrils that almost grazed her skin. Every step was a battle against panic, against the creeping sensation that something within the darkness knew her deepest fears. The boy led her to a narrow staircase, spiraling downward. As they descended, the whispers grew louder, forming words now. "You cannot escape. You belong to us, forever." Eleanor clutched the locket tightly, its light steadying her pulse. She didn't know where the stairs led, or if she would survive the descent, but she knew one thing. She had to keep moving, or the shadows would swallow her completely. At the bottom, a faint glow appeared, a door or perhaps a window offering a glimpse of something beyond the black pit. Eleanor felt a glimmer of hope, fragile, but burning. But even as she reached for it, one shadow lunged, its twisted hand grazing her shoulder. A searing cold shot through her, and she realized escaping the shadows wouldn't be simple. The hunt had only begun. Eleanor stumbled through the doorway, the faint glow from beyond barely illuminating a long, narrow corridor. The air was thick, oppressive, carrying the scent of damp stone and decay. Every step echoed unnaturally, though the space seemed impossibly long, stretching into darkness at both ends. The whispers followed her, growing louder, more insistent. They were no longer indistinct. They taunted her, speaking of her fears, her failures, even the ones she hadn't yet committed. "You are weak. You cannot run. We know your secrets." The boy tugged at her hand, guiding her forward. But Eleanor's nerves screamed to stop, to hide, to scream. She resisted, forcing her legs to move, each footfall heavier than the last. Then the walls themselves seemed to shift. Dark shapes pressed from within the stone, hands clawing at the surface, faces screaming silently. Eleanor flinched as the wall's shadows reached through cracks, brushing her arm like icy fingers. The boy whispered urgently, "Keep moving. Don't let them touch you." Eleanor's pulse raced. Every instinct screamed to run, yet she couldn't see an exit, couldn't feel solid ground, only the cold stone beneath her feet and the oppressive presence surrounding her. A sudden scream pierced the air, hers, or someone else's. Eleanor spun, but the boy urged her forward. Not back, only forward. At the far end of the corridor, a faint red light pulsed. It wasn't warm. It was alive, watching. Eleanor realized with a jolt. This corridor wasn't just a passage. It was a trap, a testing ground. Every fear, every hesitation was fuel for the shadows. The whispers surged in intensity, forming voices she knew, friends, family, even herself, but twisted, mocking, accusing. Eleanor clutched the locket, feeling its heartbeat sync with her own, and forced herself forward. Then, without warning, the floor beneath them groaned and cracked. Eleanor's scream caught in her throat as a shadow surged from the ground, reaching for her. The boy pulled her just in time, and they tumbled into a hidden alcove, panting, trembling, alive, for now. Eleanor realized the corridor had taught her something fear alone could kill. And, behind every shadow, something waited, patient, hungry, knowing that sooner or later, she would falter. Eleanor and the boy collapsed into a small chamber, the heavy stone door slamming shut behind them with a deafening echo. The air was stifling, thick with dust and the metallic tang of blood. Lanterns flickered along the walls, casting shadows that seemed alive, shifting and writhing like snakes. The first thing Eleanor noticed was the walls themselves. They were covered in faces. Not painted, not carved, but living. Eyes blinked, lips moved, whispering incomprehensible phrases. Some pleaded for help, others laughed cruelly, and a few simply watched, emotionless, as if waiting for her next move. The boy shivered, whispering, "This room, it remembers everyone who enters. Every fear, every secret. It becomes part of the walls." Eleanor's stomach churned. She pressed herself against the far wall, trying to avoid the staring, the judging, the eyes that seemed to pierce into her soul. Every step she took caused the faces to ripple, morph, and twist, sometimes into people she loved, sometimes into monsters from nightmares she had buried. A voice, soft yet commanding, echoed through the room. "Choose or be consumed." The boy grabbed her hand, urgency burning in his gaze. "We don't have time. Keep moving, Eleanor. Don't look too long. Don't let them trick you." Her heart hammered in her chest as she darted toward the far corner of the room. Faces turned with her, stretching their mouths, reaching with phantom hands that scratched the air. Eleanor felt as if invisible fingers had brushed her skin, leaving cold burns in their wake. A sudden shriek ripped through the chamber. One of the faces had screamed in her own voice. Eleanor's knees buckled, terror rooting her in place. The boy pulled her up. "You can't stop. Not here. Not now." They raced toward a small, unassuming door hidden behind a tapestry. As they reached it, Eleanor glanced back, seeing the faces twist into expressions of rage, fear, and despair all at once, as if the room itself was enraged by their escape. She pushed the door open and tumbled into the darkness beyond. The room of faces was silent behind them. For now. But Eleanor knew it would remember her, and it would wait. Eleanor and the boy stumbled into a narrow corridor, the air cold and damp. The stone walls were slick with condensation, and every step they took echoed loudly, magnifying the sense of isolation. The silence was heavy, so heavy it pressed against their ears like water. Then, the whispers began. Soft at first, almost imperceptible, like 1,000 voices murmuring secrets just beyond comprehension. Eleanor froze. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. The boy nodded, eyes wide. The whispers grew louder, circling around them. Some voices mimicked their own, repeating their thoughts in twisted, mocking tones. "You can't hide. You belong here," one hissed. Another sneered, "They'll never find you." Shadows flickered along the walls. Though there was no source of light, Eleanor felt phantom hands brush against her back, and a cold dread seeped into her bones. The boy pressed closer, murmuring, "Keep walking. Don't listen. Don't respond." Every step felt like a struggle. The corridor seemed to stretch endlessly, the walls bending in impossible ways. Faces appeared briefly in the shadows, whispering names. Eleanor recognized friends, strangers, people long dead. They called to her, pleading, taunting, warning. A sudden gust of wind slammed a hidden door shut behind them, and one whisper rose above the rest. "You cannot escape. Not ever." Eleanor's chest tightened, her breath shallow, but she forced herself forward. The boy held her hand firmly, his grip the only anchor to reality in this labyrinth of madness. At last, a faint light glimmered ahead. A door, solid, real. A promise of escape or a trap. Eleanor pushed herself toward it, her heart pounding. As they reached it, the whispers crescendoed, a deafening chorus that clawed at her mind, begging her to stop, to turn back, to surrender. The boy pulled her through the door. The corridor of whispers disappeared behind them in an instant, leaving only silence and the faint echo of voices that would haunt Eleanor forever. Eleanor and the boy stumbled into a room that seemed impossibly vast, its walls lined with towering mirrors. The glass shimmered, reflecting not just their images, but something else. Shadows moved within the reflections, writhing and twisting, forming faces Eleanor couldn't recognize, faces screaming silently, their mouths opening and closing without sound. She reached out to touch one mirror. The surface rippled like water, and a cold hand shot out, gripping her wrist. She yelped, tearing free, but the hand left a burn, icy and suffocating. The boy whispered urgently, "Don't look too long. They'll pull you in if you let them." Eleanor's eyes darted from mirror to mirror. Each reflection held versions of herself and the boy, some distorted, some grotesquely cheerful, some crying in despair. A sudden flash made Eleanor blink. One mirror showed a future she hadn't dared imagine, herself alone, trapped forever, screaming silently behind the glass. A soft voice cooed from the reflections, "Stay, we can keep you safe." She turned to flee, but the mirrors began to close in, slowly narrowing the exit. The boy grabbed her hand. "We have to break them," he shouted. Together, they threw themselves at the nearest mirror. The glass cracked, sending shards spiraling through the room like frozen daggers, each piece screaming as it shattered. The reflections writhed and wailed, their cries echoing through the chamber. Eleanor felt a weight lift, but only slightly. More mirrors loomed ahead, each hiding another trap, another horror. Through the chaos, a faint glimmer of light pulsed in the center of the room. A tiny doorway, just large enough to slip through. Eleanor swallowed her fear, gripped the boy's hand, and ran toward it. The mirrors shrieked behind them, faces pressed against the glass, reaching, clawing, begging for release. Eleanor felt their cold fingers brush her back as they escaped, the room collapsing behind them in a deafening chorus of broken whispers and shattered glass. Outside, the air was thick with fog, and the silence pressed on them. But the door behind them had closed, leaving only the faint echo of trapped souls. Eleanor's chest heaved. She whispered, "We're not safe yet, are we?" The boy shook his head, eyes scanning the fog. Not even close. Eleanor and the boy stumbled into a forest shrouded in thick, choking fog. The trees were twisted, their gnarled branches stretching like skeletal fingers, scratching the dim light from the sky. Every step they took pressed against the damp earth, but the forest seemed endless, swallowing their footprints as if mocking them. A faint whisper echoed through the trees. At first, it was unintelligible, like the wind carrying voices from far away. Then the whispers became clear. "Turn back. You don't belong here. You can't leave." Eleanor froze, her heart hammering. The boy tugged her forward. "Ignore them. Keep moving. They feed on fear." But even as he spoke, shadows slithered along the trunks, watching, waiting, their shapes twisting into familiar faces, faces Eleanor had hoped never to see again. Suddenly, a figure appeared on the path ahead, tall, cloaked, faceless, its presence pressing down with an unbearable weight. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and Eleanor could feel the ground vibrating beneath her feet. The boy grabbed her hand. "Run!" he shouted. They dashed forward. the fog parting just enough for glimpses of movement, branches snapping behind them, shadows racing in perfect silence, circling, closing in. Eleanor glanced back. The cloaked figure was gliding toward them, leaving no footprints, its whispers cutting into her mind. "You belong to us." They stumbled into a clearing. Moonlight broke through the fog, revealing hundreds of small figures, thin, hunched, their eyes glowing red, their mouths twisted in silent screams. The forest had trapped them. There was no exit. A sudden realization hit Eleanor. These were the lost souls, the ones the mirrors had tried to claim. And now the forest wanted them too. The boy whispered urgently, "We have to find the heart of the forest. It's the only way out." Eleanor nodded, fear coiling around her chest like a live thing. Together, they stepped deeper into the whispering shadows, each step drawing them closer to the forest's dark, pulsing heart. Eleanor and the boy pressed forward, their hands trembling, hearts pounding like war drums. The fog thickened, carrying the whispers of 1,000 lost voices, each one clawing at their minds. Shadows twisted and writhed around them, forming faces of friends and strangers alike, pleading, screaming, mocking. At last they reached a clearing unlike any other. In its center stood a tree massive beyond comprehension, its bark black as obsidian, veins of red pulsing like blood beneath its surface. Roots snaked outward, writhing as if alive, grasping at the earth, the air, their very souls. A voice, deep and resonant, echoed from the tree. "You have come far, but why do you resist? All who enter belong to me." Eleanor felt a cold hand close around her chest, squeezing, yet it was no hand she could see. The boy grabbed hers, pulling her toward the tree. "We end this," he said, eyes burning with defiance. He thrust a small, jagged shard of mirror into the tree's heart. Light erupted, blinding and pure, slicing through the whispers, shattering the shadows. The forest screamed, twisting and convulsing, trying to keep them, trying to devour their souls. Eleanor felt herself lifted, dragged toward the tree, the pull unbearable. With every ounce of strength, she drove the shard deeper. The tree split, cracking with a sound like 1,000 bones breaking, its black veins burning to ash. Shadows dissolved into the fog, screaming, then silence. The fog lifted. The moon shone gently overhead, soft and forgiving. Eleanor and the boy stood in the clearing, trembling, their breaths ragged, but free. The forest, once a prison of whispers and shadows, was still silent, defeated. The boy turned to her, eyes wary but relieved. "It's over, for now. But remember, fear never truly dies. It only waits." Eleanor nodded, clutching the shard as a reminder that even in the darkest places, courage could pierce the night. Together they stepped from the forest, shadows retreating, whispers fading, ready to face the world beyond the trees, but forever changed by what had lurked within.